So the Ashes of Creation community live stream just finished, and like I thought, it ended up being a pretty good stream with a lot of new information and some very good and some very challenging questions being asked. With that, let's get right into the questions. I have a full breakdown posted in my Discord if you would like to see that, and we'll go through it right now. The first question is, what were the most challenging and most enjoyable things you have found out about building a new studio? With this in mind, what is your biggest personal lesson learned throughout the process? Stevens stated that he started the studio in 2015 with his husband John after being unhappy with the state of MMOs at the time. He didn't know much about running a studio at the time, so starting the studio was like drinking from a fire hose. He said it was difficult to learn so much so quickly. The most fun aspect, he said, was watching the team grow and change over time. He said the hardest part, outside of all the learning he has had to do, is integrating the transparent development process with the creative side of developing an MMO. The next question was, what zones can we expect to see in Alpha 2, and how many of them are comparable to the Riverlands, and how far along in development they are? Steven answered that a lot of zones are planned, but not all of them will be online at the start of Alpha 2, but they will be continuously added as Alpha 2 continues forward. The big areas are the Riverlands, the Badlands, the Sand Squall Desert, the Tropics, the forest areas, some of the tabletop mountains, and the tundra and ice areas, and loops around the naval areas will be partly represented. He said there's a lot involved in creating a zone that he rattled off, and he said once a zone is 60 to 70% completed, it will be ready for Alpha 2 testing. The next question was, can you elaborate more on how the soul as a conduit may tie into the other realms and other planes, assuming these are different things, or possible avatars of the gods, which have been previously mentioned? I'll be honest with you guys, I know a lot about Ashes of Creation, but one thing I haven't paid too much attention to is the lore, so part of this answer kind of eludes me a little bit. But basically, your mortal coil flows through multiple planar locations throughout the Vera universe. The higher up in these planes you go, the stronger this planar essence is, and your actions in Vera will change how your mortal coil is shaped and interacts with the planar essence. The next question was, will the Alpha 2 map include any portion of the Eastern continent? The answer was, eventually it will, but it might not at launch, and it is not required for them to complete testing. The next question was, did the Underrealm size increase when you expanded the size of the world map, or is it still expected to be about 100 square kilometers still? And the answer was, it did not increase too much, some level of additional scope, but not much. The main theme of the Underrealm is to create an alternate path for caravans and travel. The choke points on the map remained relatively similar to the Underrealm, so they did not have to change the size all that much. The next question was, could you elaborate on what these different milestones or goalposts are in order to provide some added transparency without promising dates? Steven said there is a lot that happens in a milestone, multiple sprints worth of work. Sprints are small increments of time that a particular team will work on a particular feature or content pass in an area. He said when they set up milestones, they span across multiple development areas. He said they talk about them every live stream. Each live stream is essentially showing completed milestones. Upcoming live streams are basically a sneak peek at ongoing milestones. The next question was, will there be larger bodies of water like oceans, lakes, or rivers in the Underrealm? If so, will we be able to use our boats and ships to navigate them? The answer was, there will be Underrealm lakes and rivers. These will be locations for various unique resources that will be important, such as fish. No boats or water vehicles will be used in the Underrealm at this point. The next question was, how long are you anticipating Alpha 2 to run for? And if it goes longer than anticipated, how do you continue to keep players and viewers interested for that long without feeling burnout from seeing a bulk amount of the content? Steven's answer was, Alpha 2 will not be feature complete. As for burnout, Steven says they will adapt to that during the testing. If they need to consolidate or wipe that testing, they will do so as needed. They said new things will be released during Alpha 2, and focused testing might be done to increase participation as needed. He also reiterated this is a traditional development alpha and not a regional localization alpha like we have seen a lot of recently. The next question was, when will we get the answers on the point regarding the cosmetic store, and why is it taking so long for Intrepid to provide clarification around this when it has been an ongoing concern within the community for at least several years now? The answer was, the majority of freehold cosmetic skins are used on the home. The freehold serves three main purposes: the home building, and a part of the freehold space is dedicated to that space. Processing stations are the second purpose of freeholds, and he never really elaborated on the third purpose, but I assume it might be for crafting stations. He also said that most freehold skins apply to the housing portion, but some can also be applied to the processing stations as well. The next question was, what happens if you have a freehold and a world event happens in the area? We know that some events can affect buildings, but can it affect your freehold? The answer was no, they cannot affect your freehold, and they do not affect your personal belongings in any way. The next question was, how do you go about designing some of the more old school systems such as XP debt, minimal fast travel, and open world raiding that have really gone away for the most part in modern MMOs to be accepted again by a new generation of gamers? What made you decide to bring these back for Ashes? The answer was MMOs have tried to remove the friction in order to compete with the existing MMOs. And he said it doesn't feel good to always win and everyone gets a participation trophy. And he says the new generation of gamers have not gotten a chance to try an MMO of this style. And he thinks the main reason is the graphics were not up to par. Steven thinks if the graphics are on par for Ashes, they might be able to convince people to try a different style. The next question was, could you reiterate what the current scope for the combat system is, and if the studio is deviating away from its original goals with combat? If so, how? The answer was, I wouldn't say we have deviated, I would say we have iterated. Hybrid between tab and action is still the plan. Action is player-driven skill shots, timing, and predictive behavior, fluidity, and mobility. Tab-targeted games have some action with templated abilities, and the goal is to blend the two. The next question was, when might we see a new iteration of the character creator? Has the team been concentrating more on polishing the few races in it that we have already seen, or integrating more races with a smaller degree of polish? The answer was the character creator is being updated in Milestone 5 with the latest iterations of the races. Additional features such as new hairstyles and decals that can be used might be the next milestone. In Alpha 2, it will be usable and functional, but not feature complete. The next question was, how far are you willing to go in response to player feedback on core systems? For example, if there is a huge outcry to have more instance dungeons and raids post-launch, is that something you would address, or are you standing firm on the open world aspect of Ashes? The answer was player feedback is important, but the identity and vision of the game is not up for discussion. Open world is a core tenet of the game and not likely to change. Some of the ancillary systems might change, or subtleties of the core systems might change, but the core systems themselves are not changing. They do not want to answer to every player, but they will still listen to feedback that fits within the core design. The next question was, with server events that can only be done once and begin certain events in the game, how will this affect future expansions if two servers don't follow the same major quest paths? Steven basically said that the main story arc might have options that are not highly different, and therefore when expanding the game, they do not have to be granular with the additional story arcs and how they tie into past story arcs. The next question was, what prevents a player from staying level 1 and partying up with a level 50 player to then gather level 50 resources in the higher tier zones? That way, anyone who wants to take those resources will kill the gatherer and will get a large amount of corruption for killing a level 1 as a level 50. The answer to that was, in order to achieve master gathering experience, you will need to be a higher level. The next question was, will there be any perks to leveling an alt once you have a character max level to make the experience more convenient, such as account-wide rep, mounts, or leveling gear, or will each character on an account start from absolute scratch? The answer was each character does start from scratch, but there is shared warehouse and housing spaces, freehold crafting, and warehouses is shared, and the economy is open with most gear not being bound, so other players could help gear up a new character. The next question was about design revolving around the Holy Trinity. Where does non-healing support fall in that design concept, and how will players who choose that path remain relevant throughout the gameplay loops? The answer was most non-healing specs are supporting the tank or DPS. The Bard is critical to optimal group play. Some Bard abilities are buff-based and some are proximity-based. The next question was, do you plan on introducing content in Alpha 2 in a steadily compounding way, only adding new features and content, or in a cyclical testing manner where certain systems are turned on and off while others are iterated upon, then alternately cycled in and out? And the answer was a little bit of both, depending on the system. They might disable some systems to focus on one system for a specific test. And the next question was, will dialogue choices have any impact on the quests in regards to how NPCs respond to you or the overall outcome of that quest? Or is it more from a role-playing perspective without any major impact? The answer was, dialogue choices might change the NPC response and unlock different side arcs for the individual player. The next question was, we've seen elemental and arcane forms of magic, but will the players be able to wield blood magic, and what are the different schools of magic you are considering for the game? The answer was, wielding blood magic might happen in some storylines based on choices. Those choices might have ramifications on your player throughout the game. The next question, when Alpha 2 opens up, do you plan on introducing all the primary archetypes before adding the secondary archetype system into the test? Additionally, once the secondary archetype system is added, will you want to test it with only a few classes available at that point in development? The answer to that was, they may release a limited scope of the secondary archetypes without having all the base archetypes, and they might release a limited scope of secondary archetypes at first. The next question was, do you have any concerns on players eventually discovering a meta server build with nodes due to players heading to specific nodes and regions because they find the content more enjoyable? And if so, how would you go about getting players to shift around in the world to break up that meta? The answer to that was, Steven is not too concerned with that happening. The way the world takes into account server development almost ensures very different outcomes across different servers. The next question was, who do you consider to be the true natives or traditional people of Vera? Could we be seen as foreigners trying to colonize Vera, or would the Tulnar view us very differently than that? The answer was, the Tulnar might view those returning as the descendants of those that caused the calamity in the first place, especially the older generations. The next question was, how advanced is going to be the system of hiring and customizing laborers on your freehold? The answer was relatively advanced. There are a few paths you can take and different tiers and costs with higher level laborers, and the same is true for node and castle mercenaries. And leveling your freehold and certain node policies might also boost these hireable NPCs. The next question was, you spoke in the last stream about how eventually Intrepid will hold off on engine updates until post-launch, but didn't state if you were considering upgrading to 5.2. Is this something you plan on doing, and if so, what features are you planning to utilize from this update? The answer is 5.2 is on the radar, and they are not done updating yet. They might skip and go to 5.3 instead. The next question is, are there any mechanics or systems that you wanted to add to the game but haven't because you wanted to keep your development schedule, and if so, what were they? The answer was yes, many new ideas get thrown into the backlog for post-launch. The next question is, will you sell or release your Ashes of Creation themed TTRPG module for other DMs to use? The answer to that is, there's a lot Steven would like to do in terms of expanding the IP post-launch of the game. The next question is, how exactly does the constellation system work? You've stated they will be very relevant to systems such as narrative, empowering abilities and items, and gathering relics. But how do they tie into these systems? Steven said that the constellation system is a predicate system. They span across many systems. Once a player has achieved finding a constellation, it might start a new story arc, it might unlock a node being able to acquire a relic. The goal is to make adventuring matter to the game and impact the game. The final question, what is the biggest obstacle preventing Intrepid Studios from being ready to begin Alpha 2 testing? The answer was content production, filling all the systems they have with content. And that is all the questions that they had, 30 questions in total. Some very good questions, some questions that I was about, but that's how it goes. I'm not too big into lore personally, so the lore questions for me weren't too exciting. And a few of the questions we already knew the answers to. But that's fine because we've gotten Steven in the past, when you ask him a question that's already been answered, gives a different answer. So it's not always bad to ask the same question, in my opinion. That is the summary of the Q&A. Let me know your thoughts, and with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.